Let's talk about wide receivers that you should start or sit heading into week 9 of the fantasy football season. It's important to note that we've got two teams on bye, the Steelers and the 49ers, meaning you will have no George Pickens or Debo or Jawan Jennings, Ricky Pearsall, right? These guys won't be available to you. But in today's video, I'm going to go through all 30 teams and play 15 matchups in total. But just before we start with Thursday Night Football, I have to let you know that there is a chance Deontay Johnson gets traded this week. At the moment, that has not happened. But if it does, we'll be live streaming each and every night, talking about updated rankings and how it impacts each team that he might have been traded to or traded away from, right? All right, so let's get into Thursday Night Football then. We've got Texans at Jets. This should be a good game. There's a lot on the line for the New York Jets. Honestly, I hate to say it, but Jets fans, if you lose this game, it's done. Not even just this year, but I think it's Jover. Like, how do you recover from this? What are the excuses at this point? You fired your coach, you traded for Davante Adams. There is a lot on the line. Don't be surprised if we have an upset win from the Jets because their back is truly against the wall. This entire team, man, they've got to be fighting for every inch of their life right now. But it's a 42.5 point over, and the Texans are favored by 1.5 points, even though they are the away team. Stephon Diggs, there's no way he's playing. All right. The reports are that he's not expected to play. BS. He's not going to be out there. There's a 0% chance Stephon Diggs plays this week, so you won't have him. And oddly enough, if you're a Tank Dell owner in fantasy football, that's actually probably a good thing because Tank Dell is potentially going to drown in targets. I'm talking 6 to 9 targets per game until Nico Collins is back and healthy. So I'm going to go ahead and label Tank Dell a must start simply because they need him. They desperately need Tank Dell. I mean, the reality is by the time you're watching this video, Stephon Diggs is potentially even ruled out for the entire season with that non-contact injury to his knee. So I definitely think Tank Dell is in play. On the opposite side of the ball, I know there's probably going to be people who are annoyed. I have both Davante Adams and Garrett Wilson listed as must starts. I know Davante Adams has been really disappointing, hasn't had over 10 PPR points in any game this year, but I do think they are bound to figure it out. They are underdogs in this game. This is a good Texans offense that they're facing. They're going to have to throw the ball a lot, and I do think we're just waiting on both Davante and Aaron Rodgers to get on the same page. They need more layups. They need more reps in practice with this new offense that they're in. So I do think Adams and Wilson both are must starts. And funnily enough, Garrett Wilson's been the better play over the last 2 weeks, averaging 8.5 targets per game, over 100 yards last week in the air against the New England Patriots. So, call me a fool, but I'm still going to play both of those guys moving forward. All right. Let's talk about the start of the 1 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. That's Cowboys at Falcons, 48.5 point over under, which is tied for the highest over under of the week. The Falcons are favored by 1.5 points. CeeDee Lamb, of course, you're going to start CeeDee Lamb coming off a 17 target game. Oh boy, if you remember last year, CeeDee Lamb did not start off on a heater. It was really second half of the season where CeeDee Lamb became the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football. This could be the start of that happening. 17 targets. Man, CeeDee Lamb might explode here soon, but he's got to be in every single lineup. And you know what? I do think Jalen Tolbert is a spot start this week. Didn't have a good game last week, but the reality is this is a high over under, a defense that is top 10 in fantasy points allowed over the last 4 weeks, and two offenses that I think could be putting up a lot of points. This could be a barn burner, and I think Tolbert will be a fine, flexible option. On the opposite side of the ball, 2 weeks in a row now, we've labeled London and Mooney must starts. I'm going to continue to do that. The Cowboys over the last 4 weeks are a top 7 matchup for your fantasy wide receiver. So both of those guys should be in play in a very high scoring affair. By the way, I'm going to talk about points allowed a lot today. And you should know that we are taking account the last 4 weeks in order to be the most accurate and the most up to date on what to expect from these teams, right? Because teams change in season. All right. The third matchup we'll look at is the Broncos at the Ravens. 44.5 point over under. The Ravens are favored by 8.5 points. You know what? I don't know, man. That feels like too much. This Broncos team deserves a little bit more respect. I know they just played the Carolina Panthers, but this is a decent team, man. They've beat some good teams. The defense looks good. Bo Nix looks competent. And as far as this game, I definitely think Courtland Sutton is in play. In fact, Courtland Sutton is a must start for me in this matchup. His last 2 weeks have been a roller coaster. 0 targets versus New Orleans on Thursday Night Football in week 7. And then last week versus the Panthers, 11 targets, 8 catches, 100 yards, over 17 fantasy points. Now, here's why I think Sutton must be started this week. Because number one, just like Vegas predicts, I'm predicting that the Broncos are going to be down in this matchup. And number two, every single offense has been able to throw against the Baltimore Ravens this year. In the last 4 weeks, they're giving up the second most points to fantasy wide receivers. So I definitely think Sutton is in play. It would have been fun to see Franklin and Vele continue to break out, but with those two names, they're just too unreliable to really trust them this week, in my opinion. And on the opposite side of the ball, you're definitely going to go ahead and start Zay Flowers. You know, it's technically not a great matchup, but they get Zay Flowers involved in so many different creative ways that I don't think this is one of those games where I'm really worried because of the Denver Broncos defense, right? Okay, moving on to the Dolphins at the Bills. 47.5 point over under, which was tied with a couple other games for the second highest over under of the week. We should see a lot of fantasy points in this one. The Bills are favored by 6.5 points. And quite frankly, that doesn't really hurt the wide receivers for the Dolphins, because if they are actually down in this game, that just means we're going to get more targets for Tyreek Hill and Jalen Waddle. Both guys are labeled must starts for me. Tyreek Hill, my wide receiver 5. Jalen Waddle, my wide receiver 22. Tyreek Hill had a pretty good game last week. Wasn't exactly what you wanted it to be, right? 6 catches, 72 yards on 9 targets. But I do think we are just waiting for a blow-up game, which should be on the horizon for him now that Tua is back and healthy. Tua looked good, by the way. I mean, he didn't look bad. He didn't look like he had any obvious rust, per se. And then as far as Jalen Waddle goes, not the game that you wanted to have for him. 6 targets, only 4 catches for 45 yards. But we know this is a guy on any given day can put up 40 points. So if you want that upside in your roster, of course, there is a floor that you don't love. But if you want that upside in your roster, you got to keep playing him. And in this matchup, they'll probably need Waddle more than they typically have in previous weeks. On the opposite side of the ball, this has to be the most perplexing situation for any wide receiver room right now for fantasy purposes, because Keon Coleman did not start off the season great. He didn't look like an alpha, struggled to create separation, struggled with some silly drops. And then they trade for Amari Cooper. And my thought is, okay, they want to go win right now, and they think Amari Cooper can be their alpha. And then in the last 2 weeks, they've made Keon Coleman their alpha after getting Amari Cooper. 2 games over 16 fantasy points. Both games over 70 receiving yards. He had a touchdown last week versus Seattle. They're using him on the goal line, Keon that is. And Amari Cooper played just 50% of the snaps, had 2 targets. And then Khalil Shakir had 10 targets, 19 fantasy points, over 100 yards versus Seattle. I mean, if you know what's going to happen this week for the Buffalo Bills, I would really love for you to DM me the Powerball numbers as well, because I'd love to make some money with you if you can predict the future. I'm going to label all of these guys spot starts. I have no idea who is the best person to play. I do think Amari Cooper is going to get more snaps, more targets, and I do think he will be the alpha for this team eventually, but I am so confused. It's a round 1 wide receiver who's starting to break out. Well, round 2 technically, I guess, for Keon, but really good player who's starting to break out. You've got a veteran who's been a staple in the wide receiver room for ages, and Amari Cooper that they just traded for. I mean, it's chaos. It's hell. And quite frankly, if I had one of these names, I might be trying to trade away from them just to try and find a more consistent name. For example, the next matchup we'll talk about, Saints-Panthers, Chris Olave. Chris Olave is a great example here. I would rather have Chris Olave than any of those Bills wide receivers. NFC South showdown here. The Saints are favored by 6.5 points. And man, with no Rashid Shaheed, Chris Olave is finally getting the target share he deserves. 14 targets last week versus the Chargers, 8 catches, 107 yards. And we could be getting Derek Carr back. Derek Carr, I think, can only help Chris Olave at this point. So Chris Olave is definitely a must start. The Panthers are middle of the pack against wide receivers, but we're definitely going to put him in our lineups. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, I have to include a lot of context for you guys in this Panthers take. You have to be aware that I cannot predict the future. At the time of recording this, I don't know if Deontay Johnson's getting traded or not, but there are reports that he should be traded, which means by the time you're watching this, he might not even be a Carolina Panther. So let's go through every scenario. Scenario 1, if Deontay Johnson is still Carolina Panther. I'm going to label him a must start. This is a top 12 matchup for fantasy wide receivers. And of course, that is if Andy Dalton plays. If Andy Dalton plays, my wide receiver 22 in fantasy football. Now, if Deontay Johnson is traded and Bryce Young starts, I don't want to start anyone on this team. All right? Fun to stash Coker and Leggett, but I don't want to start them. Now, if Deontay Johnson is traded and Andy Dalton is the starter, then I do think Leggett and Coker become very interesting spot starts. We know Dalton can get the ball to the wide receivers. Coker is probably going to replace Deontay Johnson as that role in this offense. I don't think Leggett will replace him, but both of these guys should be due for more targets, and it's a decent matchup where they're probably going to be down. So hopefully that's helpful. I feel like I did as much as I could to help you guys there. Let me know if you feel me there. All right, Raiders at Bengals, 44.5 point over under. The Bengals are favored by 8.5 points. That is tied for the second largest spread of the week. So Vegas has their own Raiders as big time underdogs this week. Let's start with the Bengals. Jamar Chase, T. Higgins, if those guys play, there's no scenario in which you don't play those names. Jamar Chase is currently the wide receiver 1 in fantasy football, and T. Higgins was actually out targeting him before he went down with that injury. So they're both must starts in a pass-focused offense. On the opposite side of the ball, Jacoby Myers is one of my favorite plays this week. He had 7 targets last week, 6 catches, 52 yards, and a tud against the Kansas City Chiefs, a difficult matchup where they were down at points in that game. Here's the deal. The Bengals right now in the last 4 weeks are the 12th best matchup for your wide receiver. Jacoby Myers, they put him in the slot, they put him outside, they get him targets consistently. No Devontae Adams. He is that dude for this team, and I think they're going to be down. I think they're going to need to throw the ball, so I think there could be a very good game for Jacoby Myers here in week number 9. All right, moving on. Chargers at Browns. Lad, the space creator. If you don't know the Dynasty channel, we have a Dynasty channel. It's called Dynastyland Football. And Lad was one of my favorite players in the 2024 class. We called him Lad, the space creator. We loved his profile, loved his film. And finally, in week 8, the man breaks out 6 catches, 111 yards, 2 tuds, 29 fantasy points. I'm going to label him a must start. We're not going to leave the heater right now. The Browns in the last 4 weeks are a top 10 matchup for your fantasy wide receivers. And then on the opposite side of the ball, we got another guy who's on a damn heater in Cedric Tillman, the former Tennessee Volunteer, who has been absolutely dominating over the last couple weeks since they moved on from Amari Cooper. The guy is averaging over 10 targets per game. He's averaging over 85 receiving yards per game and at least a touchdown per game. 18 points in week 7, 28 points in week 8. Now he faces the Chargers, who are a pretty good defense, I will say, against wide receivers. But when you have a team that's going to be down most games, having to throw the ball, and you have a clear red zone threat like Cedric Tillman, I'm going to label him a must start. Yeah, we could be crazy, but we're going to ride the wave here. As long as wherever that wave will take us, we're going to ride it. All right, moving on to the Commanders at the Giants. I am actually pretty excited for this game. NFC East showdown. Anytime the Commanders and the Giants face off, it's always a very close affair. These two teams don't like each other. They're always thinking about the NFC East. We know this. Divisional games, specifically in the NFC East at least, there's always this hatred going on. There's a little bit more to play for, if you will. Terry McLaurin, man, I have been talking to my friends about this, but this is everything NFL fans, not even just Commander fans, but NFL fans have ever wanted for Terry McLaurin. We could not ask for more for this man. Accurate targets, the deep ball on time, on target, in stride, red zone opportunities. I mean, Terry McLaurin looks like the definition of a league winner. He's a wide receiver 9 in fantasy football. Since he and Jaden Daniels figured it out in week 3, from week 3 onwards, he hasn't really had a single bust game. He's been very good. And we're going to continue to play him against the Giants, who, let's be honest, George Pickens should have had a huge game last week. So this isn't a very tough matchup when you think about it. All right, and then on the opposite side of the ball, Malik Neighbors was a bit of a downer week, but he still had over 10 targets, and I still think he's going to be a name that you can rely on moving forward. There's really no scenario in which I'm sitting a name like Malik Neighbors. As far as Wan'Dale Robinson goes, his first game since week 3, under 9 targets, and he only had 5. That's a bit concerning, but I still think he's a decent spot start. He's a floor play. That's what he is. That's all he will ever be. All right, moving on. Patriots at the Titans. And to be honest, this is the most disgusting game I think I've talked about this entire year, 9 weeks into the season. Is that too rude? I don't like, maybe that's too rude. All right. But by far the lowest over under of the week, 37.5 points. No other matchup has a projected point total under 40. The Titans are favored by 3 points, but if there's no Drake May, I have no interest in any of these Patriot wide receivers. Quite frankly, even if there was Drake May, I don't know if I'd be interested because we don't know who the guy is yet. Maybe that's Boutte, but there's no consistency yet. And then on the opposite side of the ball, Calvin Ridley finally has a decent game. He has 15 targets, catches 10 of those targets for 143 yards. But to be fair, the Lions are one of the best matchups in fantasy for your wide receiver. So if it was going to happen, it was going to happen in a good matchup. Now he faces the Patriots. They're middle of the pack against wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. Can you start Ridley? Yes. He's more of a flex than a reliable start. The reality is we have much more evidence that he's a bust on a week-to-week basis than evidence that he's a great league-winning player. So let's see some consistency first, but in deeper formats, you can throw him out there. Low over under, not a lot of projected points. Titans are favored anyway. Will they need to throw the ball that much? You make that call. All right. We're moving on to the start of the 4 p.m. Eastern Standard Time slate of games. Bears at Cardinals, 44.5 point over under. The Cardinals are favored by 1.5 points. Will the Bears be licking their wounds after that Hail Mary last week? That was so fun to watch. I will never forget that as a Commanders fan. And honestly, shout out to Tyreek Stevenson. Thanks, man. Appreciate you. Thanks for not doing your job. I'm going to make Bears fans unhappy now. But look, DJ Moore, great start this week, in my opinion. It's been really up and down. The target share has been strange between DJ and Keenan and Rome Odunze. But DJ Moore is one of the better starts this week on this team. Wide receiver 18 in my rankings. The Cardinals are 6th in points allowed to wide receivers in the last 4 weeks combined. So I definitely think DJ Moore's in play. Keenan Allen is a spot start. He led the wide receivers in targets with 7 last week. And as far as Odunze goes, man, there's just very little ceiling here. There will definitely be games this year where he pops off, but I don't know when the consistency really hits. And as far as Marvin Harrison Jr., man, come on, baby. Revival is here from Marvin Harrison. Week 8 versus Miami, which was a tough matchup, by the way. 6 catches, 111 yards, and a touchdown. The guy looked incredible. He was making highlight catches. He was making the toe taps. I think he balanced a ball on his ear once while diving for the catch. He looks great. He looks very good. Now, hopefully he and Kyler Murray can stay on the same page. I am going to label him a must start, but it is a bad matchup versus the Bears. The Bears are a tough defense to throw on. So just keep in mind, you might want to limit expectations in that matchup. All right, moving on. Jaguars at Eagles. All right, I said Jaguars. I know someone's going to roast me for that. The Jaguars at the Eagles. 47.5 point over under. This is one of those matchups tied for the second highest over under of the week. A lot of points should come from this one. The Eagles are favored by 7 points. And at the time of recording this video, I don't know if Brian Thomas is going to play. In fact, there hasn't been more confusing reporting the last couple of days than what's been reported on Brian Thomas, because we had a report that came out that said Brian Thomas could miss 2 to 4 weeks with a chest injury. And then an hour later, we had a different report that said he's considered day-to-day and has a chance to play in week 9. But to be fair, that second report was from Doug Peterson, and Doug Peterson has historically been completely unreliable when it comes to injury statuses for his players or expectations for them during an injury. So my inclination says that Brian Thomas won't play. But of course, if he does play, he's a must start. He's a wide receiver 7 in fantasy football so far this year. So you're definitely going to put him out there. Now, if Brian Thomas is ruled out, I don't think you can play Parker Washington or Gabe Davis. Obviously, Christian Kirk is out for the year with that broken collarbone. But I do think Parker Washington is a very good stash. I'll say that. At minimum, he's a very good stash. And for the Eagles, it's easy. Every week, you're going to start A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. You don't overthink that. Those guys are superstars. You know that. I know that. Your mom knows that. Your dog knows that. Your neighbor knows that, who you don't talk to. Anyway, let's move on. Lions at Packers. NFC North showdown, baby. So we don't know if Jordan Love's going to play. So we'll go through this matchup. We'll talk about every bit of context that we can to get you prepared. But it's a 47.5 point over under. So there should be a lot of fantasy points in this one. The Lions are favored by 4.5 points. That line is going to move depending on if Jordan Love is healthy or not. So it's something we're going to have to monitor over the course of the week. But let's start with the Packers. Okay, so scenario one, Jordan Love plays football. If Jordan Love plays football, Jaden Reed's a must start. I know it's been up and down for him so far, but I think they're going to need him in this matchup. Romeo Doubs is a spot start. And then really Wicks and Watson at this point, it's who gets a turn this week. That's what it feels like with those two names. They split opportunities. I don't know. I don't like it. If Malik Willis plays, I still think you need to start Jaden Reed. He feels like the easier wide receiver to get manufactured touches for, but I don't think you can start Romeo Doubs because, again, you're relying on a lot of deep balls for Romeo Doubs, a lot of ball placement for him, red zone opportunities, and I don't think Malik Willis is going to be reliable there. In fact, I think the only wide receiver who caught a touchdown when Malik Willis started earlier for this team was Dontavion Wicks. So, look, if Jordan Love plays, I think it's wheels up for these guys. If not, I would be very cautious, but let's hope he's out there. And it's a good matchup. The Lions are the 5th best matchup for wide receivers in the last 4 weeks. Now, Amon-Ra St. Brown is a must start, and outside of that with the Lions, you don't overthink it. And look, if you have Amon-Ra St. Brown, I can understand why you might be disappointed by last week's performance, but the reality is you should feel lucky because he got a touchdown in a game where Jared Goff threw 85 passing yards. This team was up, I think, they had 35 points at half. There wasn't a single moment they needed to throw the ball to Amon-Ra, to any player, really. They could have thrown the ball 0 times in that game and won versus the Titans. That's just the reality, all right? Moving on to the Rams at the Seahawks. 48.5 point over-under. This is tied for the highest over-under of the week. Seahawks are favored by 1.5 points. Another divisional showdown here. This is very simple for me. For the Rams, Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua, both must starts in my eyes. As long as these two guys are healthy, there's not a single lineup that they're not going to be in. It was really funny last week because the reports came out about Puka last minute playing, and then also last minute, he's going to be on a snap count. On our live stream, we suggested, hey, I would start him. Most of you guys aren't going to have a better option. Even if he plays 50% of the snaps, he could get enough targets and receiving yards. And he has 7 catches, 106 yards on 57% of the snaps. He'll play more and more as he gets healthier and healthier. So both of those guys are must plays in my eyes in a good matchup where the Seahawks are a top 8 play for wide receivers over the last 4 weeks. On the opposite side of the ball, if Metcalf plays, he is a must start, but we don't know that right now. There's optimism that he could play in week 9, but it's certainly not a sure thing. The coaching staff don't really know. They can't commit to anything, so it's possible he plays, but if he plays, then JSN becomes a spot start. He's not really like a must play anymore, but it is a good matchup for JSN to have a game. And then if Metcalf is ruled out, JSN does become a must start. He is the reliable option when DK Metcalf is out. Last week, he had 7 targets, 13 fantasy points, while Tyler Lockett had under 2. So I do think if you're going to play one of these names, if Metcalf is out, then JSN is the name I prefer to play. Okay, moving on to Colts at Vikings. This is the Sunday night football game. And man, for a lot of selfish reasons, I hope it's Joe Flacco out there playing quarterback. I'm not going to lie to you. Look, I don't want to trash on Anthony Richardson. I think enough people have done that, but I have never seen that ever. I mean, I'm only 30 years old. I'm not that old, but I have never seen a quarterback who is healthy just say, "Hey, I'm tired. Can y'all sub in?" I mean, this isn't basketball. That's not how this works. What does that say to the rest of your team? Anyway, I don't want to go too hard on him, but I've already been hoping that Joe Flacco was going to lead the team anyway for these wide receivers. Let's see what happens. But if Flacco plays, Downs and Pittman are both must starts. This is the best matchup for your wide receivers in the last 4 weeks. Incredible opportunity for these guys if Flacco is playing. But if they start Anthony Richardson, I think Josh Downs becomes a spot start. Yes, he had 9 targets, but 4 of them were catchable, and he turned 1 of them into a house call. That's not a reliable thing, guys, moving forward. And I just don't think you can play Pittman or Pierce. Pierce might have a long touchdown, but it's certainly not predictive. It's a high over-under. The Vikings are favored, so the Colts probably need to throw the ball, but I just don't trust Anthony Richardson. Would love it if Joe Flacco played. Now, on the opposite side of the ball, Justin Jefferson, of course, you're going to play him. My wide receiver 3 on the week, the wide receiver 3 in fantasy football so far. And on the opposite side of the ball, Jordan Addison is a spot start. It's been weird, but I do think they might have a get-right game for him. You know, he's not been very happy, and he's a valued member of this team. So I do think they will be intentional about getting him more involved. This could be the game that happens. But honestly, which is a little bit surprising to me, the Colts in the last 4 weeks have been a tough matchup for wide receivers. In fact, they're only 26th in points allowed, which means they're technically the 7th worst matchup in fantasy football right now over the last 4 weeks. Regardless, though, I do think you can start Addison in deeper formats. All right, last game is Monday Night Football, Bucs at Chiefs. This would have been such an exciting game if the Bucs were able to stay healthy. Regardless, Jalen McMillan is a spot start. This team is probably going to be down. It's a tough matchup versus the Chiefs. We all know that. But Jalen McMillan led the team in snaps, led the wide receiver room in snaps, targets, routes run. Okay. So I do think that there will be good games ahead for Jalen McMillan. In fact, he actually beat his man down the field for a touchdown, but Baker Mayfield underthrew the ball and it was intercepted. But look, I do think there will be better games ahead for Jalen McMillan. The peripherals are all really good for him to have a decent season rest of the way. And I think he is a spot start. And the Chiefs are the largest favorites of the week, by the way, 9.5 points. So they're probably going to have to throw the ball a lot. Tampa Bay, that is. On the opposite side of the ball, DeAndre Hopkins did not have the week that you probably wanted him to have if you have him in fantasy football. He had 3 targets, caught 2 of them. I'm sure he'll get more and more involved. How long will that take? I don't know. But this is back-to-back weeks where Xavier Worthy has 8 targets. He got into the end zone this week. And I've said this every single week this year. If he has a touchdown, great for fantasy. If he doesn't, bust for fantasy. So if you can predict that on a week-to-week basis, be my friend. Go ahead and do so. Technically, it's a top 5 matchup for fantasy wide receivers over the last 4 weeks, but just limit your expectations. Be aware that you're throwing a guy who is boom bust. He's a definition of boom bust. Without being rude, he's kind of Gabe Davis in a way, right? So with the Bills, that is. So I appreciate you guys for watching the video. Do me a favor, hit that like button, show some love. Subscribe if you like the content. The last thing I'll say is if you don't have a free account on Vlog Fantasy, go get one. You got to use the promo code LAND, LAND at sign up. And when you do, you get access to the expert consensus rankings for free, the My Team Analyzer for free, and the trade calculator all for free. Last thing, if you have a question, a start sit this week that you really need help with, check out the pinned comment. There's a link to our website where you can ask us for a start sit, a trade question, a team review, whatever the case may be. Let's go get some wins in week 9 all up. Now that those idiots are done talking, who needs some rankings?
Hell yeah, I need some rankings.
Then use promo code LAND, LAND, for 30% off any membership at flockfantasy.com.
Oh.